And look, I hope you're getting lots of positive messages without me belittling the more negative and worrying stuff. And it's always a really fine balancing act. But one of the consistent conversations I've had with fund managers over the last year essentially is we're not changing what we do. We still care. We're still looking for companies that are leading. We're still trying to fund solutions. So there are lots of reasons to be cheerful. This stuff has not gone away. It's not vanished. So we're going to have a number of speakers today. First couple now, next three towards the end of the day, on reasons to be cheerful. So I'm asking each of these speakers to talk for 6 minutes, and then we'll have maybe two 6-minute slots, and then maybe questions after them both, just to make sure we kind of run to time. So I don't mind who goes first. Do you have any preferences to who goes first?
Testing?
Oh, yeah. You're welcome to use that mic up there if you want to stand up, or you can sit down. It's entirely up to you.
Hello, I'm Caroline Langley. I work at Quilter Cheviot as one of the fund managers on two proud to have a sustainability-focused label funds, Sustainable Opportunities Balance Fund and Sustainable Opportunities Growth Fund, formerly the Climate Assets Funds. And I'm going to completely change the tone of what we've been chatting about. First of all, this is a session about how to be cheerful and what optimistic things are out there, and particularly focusing in on good health and well-being, SDG 3. And the area that I'm particularly cheerful about, or see some real long-term opportunity, that sustainable opportunity, is in target 3.4, regarding reducing mortality from non-communicable diseases and promoting mental health. Now, in a year, about 60 million human beings die, which is a pretty big number. And 2/3 of those, 40 million-ish, effectively die from their immune systems being out of balance. And that out of balance is all about a failure of homeostasis, which is like the body regulating itself, the outside environment, and having to regulate its internal environment to cope with that. Now, as humans, we have lived in the most amazing variety of places, and we've had to be super, super flexible. But it's quite possible now that our lifestyle and how we live is actually really forcing that flexibility to the limits, because our immune systems are sort of struggling. Part of how this sort of homeostasis works is this inflammatory response gets set off, which is literally like the help signal of pain, and that causes all the sort of tissue regeneration and repair, and effectively bringing us back into the stable state. But too much inflammation, and it's seriously bad news. And effectively, diseases made worse or caused by inflammation include heart disease, strokes, Alzheimer's, diabetes, pneumonia, pulmonary disease, and even cancer. And also some of those really long-term debilitating diseases that people really struggle with living with, like arthritis and inflammatory bowel disease, are also basically at their heart all about inflammation. And bizarrely, or perhaps not when you start drilling into it, actually the conditions, the mental health conditions, depression and anxiety, all go back down to that whole bringing things back into balance all over again. What we need to be social, as social animals, is also what causes us distress when things don't work out, when we're feeling, ruminating on things, or feeling, out of sorts with our peers and stuff. So modern day life causes this sort of absolute barrage of stress, this fight, flight, the deadlines, the endless pings from social media. And actually, a chronically sort of aggravated sympathetic nervous system actually results in inflammation. So inflammation is like the big thing, right? And you can see how it feeds into lots of problems, and indeed the various different sorts of cortisol hormones effectively also contribute to things like type 2 diabetes and hypertension. So, okay, it's at the heart of all problems, okay? So why the optimism, Caroline? Why any cheerfulness at all? It's actually a huge, huge opportunity because it's all the same thing. And all of these pathways basically rely on this nerve that goes down the side of your neck called the vagus nerve. And there are like 105 fibers on one side and like 105,000 fibers on one side and 87,000 fibers on the other. And this nerve like comes about when you're literally like about 3 weeks after you're conceived. And it literally roams throughout your whole body, getting feedback from your gut, from your breathing, from all sorts of different places. And it's really what keeps us in regulation. And why this is all exciting is that we can hack this nerve and effectively cause better health outcomes as a result. And many of you may be aware from sort of what started off as a diabetes problem and how the use of these GLP-1 drugs in diabetes effectively sort of mediating all of this actually caused this sort of side effect when it came to treating obesity. And obesity is one of those things that just literally lights up the brain, doesn't it? Like cake, I need it. But the GLP-1s are the ones that kind of stop you eating 12 cakes or 20 cakes, and that they kick in and kind of bring you back down to a more sort of sensible level. So all of this, so naturally, the pathway kicks off in your gut and it produces these GLP-1s, and then the brain pings them all out more, and that stops you eating your cake. And now you can have these artificial ones that effectively stay in there all of the time and do a lot more. But where I think there is a huge opportunity, and the fact that maybe we've accidentally stumbled upon this, although I'm sure the researchers wouldn't like me for saying that, is that there are secondary effects here too. So there's been some data out from effectively Novo Nordisk comparing themselves to their rival Eli Lilly and their drugs, effectively finding positive outcomes to do with cardiovascular disease, as well as just the obesity and the diabetes on all of this. And potentially sort of saying that, that there's something else going on here, and it's not just a secondary effect of losing weight. There's actually something in some of these drugs that's doing a little bit more. There are also research going on testing some of these sorts of drugs on Alzheimer's disease. So they've potentially been shown to the neuroinflammation may be part of the cause of Alzheimer's, and so actually testing these drugs on those. And there may be effectively wider implications in, basically it's all about cravings, it's wanting stuff, it's the gluttony, maybe the gluttony that's getting the whole world in a bit of a mess. We want more alcohol, nicotine, online shopping, nail picking, social media overuse, overworking, everything is like to excess. And actually, if we can find something that can help us dampen down these pathways, it could be seriously good news for the planet. And other trials are going on, using these drugs in things like alcohol management and that sort of thing. Have I got more time? Or
if you wrap up, that'd be good.
So I suppose there are other ways of managing it from a more organic point of view, in terms of healthy living, gut health, to do with maybe even sort of wearable devices that some of our companies are producing the chips that go into, so you can regulate things like your sleep, your glucose levels, your heart rate, all of these amazing things, and that can be extremely helpful and investable too. Also just about creating those healthy cities, thinking of healthy buildings, healthy everything, that can be an element bringing that healthy start to people to enable them to actually look after these responses in a more organic sense. But also from a drug perspective, it's hugely encouraging that we're finding these opportunities now to effectively hack the system, and potentially that could be the start of a precipice of opportunity and a reason to be cheerful.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That was definitely different, and we'll take questions after if we can.
So good afternoon. I'm Rob Lambert. I work at RBC BlueBay as a portfolio manager on the Impact Aligned Fund. It's a pleasure to join you today to discuss why, despite the noise in markets and the challenges in the energy transition, there are genuine reasons to be optimistic. My focus today is on transmission and renewables integration. That's often overlooked compared to generation, but it's where some of the most exciting advances are happening. The challenge, so to set the scene, renewable energy overtook coal as the world's leading source of electricity in the first half of this year, and global renewable capacity additions are hitting record highs, with solar and wind expected to supply over a third of global power by 2030. But the bottleneck is increasingly the grid. We can build turbines and panels quickly, connecting them is harder. By 2040, we need 80 million kilometers of new or refurbished power lines. Today, in markets from the US to Europe to Asia, interconnection queues stretch for years. In the UK alone, some projects are told to wait until the late 2030s for grid access. In Germany, there are over 4 gigawatts of offshore wind, which are unable to feed the grid due to lack of connection capacity. Also, on average, the grids are very old and in need of modification. On average, more than half the grid length in advanced economies are over 20 years old. In EM, we're already at a third. So the issue there is reliability, high maintenance costs, frequent outages, and voltage fluctuations like we had in Spain quite recently. And the other thing was these old systems are built for one-way power flows from large centralized power plants to consumers. Today, we have distributed energy storage, like solar and EVs, feeding back into the grid. So the challenge is stark, but there are 3 reasons we should be cheerful. Firstly, technology. Transmission is no longer just poles and wires. High voltage direct current is transforming how we move clean power over vast distances with minimal losses. We're seeing projects like the UK's Eastern Green Link or India's massive HVDC corridors, enabling offshore wind and solar in remote regions to supply demand centers reliably. Smart grids and digitalization, their sensors, artificial intelligence, real-time balancing is making the system much more flexible. We're no longer simply pushing electrons from central plants, we're orchestrating millions of distributed resources, rooftop solar, batteries, EVs into a stable network. And subsea cables are now longer, cheaper, and more robust, which brings about the opportunity for areas with surplus production to transport to a region like Europe, where there are various projects under consideration. We've got the Egypt-Greece, Tunisia-Italy, and the Black Sea cable from Georgia to Romania, with a total of 6 gigawatts of potential power supplying Europe. Reason 2, policy momentum. That is getting stronger, particularly around transmission. In the US, the Inflation Reduction Act is backed by federal action to accelerate permitting and interregional lines. FERC's latest transmission rule, the most significant in decades, requires long-term regional planning, not piecemeal fixes. Europe is prioritizing cross-border interconnections and fast-tracking grid investments in its Repower EU plan. Germany and Denmark, for instance, are coordinating offshore hubs in the North Sea. Even in emerging markets, multilateral institutions are pivoting capital into grids. The World Bank's recent $1 billion program for African transmission is a good sign of this shift. Reason 3, investment flows are accelerating. Capital is mobilizing at scale. Transmission used to be a dull corner of utilities. Today, it's become an asset class in its own right, attracting infrastructure funds, sovereign wealth, and pension investors. Global grid investment is expected to double to over $600 billion annually by 2030, according to the IEA. That's not a forecast, it's a necessity if we're to meet net zero targets. Finally, innovative finance is emerging. We have blended finance for emerging markets, merchant models for long interconnectors, and a RAB-based framework for large-scale projects. So in short, transmission is no longer just cost, it's growth, it's stability, and it's an opportunity. The implications for investors. So for fund managers, this translates into long-duration, inflation-linked assets with stable returns. There's exposure to real growth. Grids must expand by at least 2 times by 2030. There's also optionality in adjacent areas, battery storage, flexibility services, digital optimization. Transmission is no longer just a cost center, it's a profit pool with regulated and contracted cash flows underpinning the transition. To borrow from the title of today's session, there are real reasons to be cheerful. The clean energy build-out is unstoppable. Transmission is catching up thanks to engineering, policy, and finance. And as investors, we have a unique opportunity not just to participate, but to accelerate the transformation.
Um,